There's the things I know I don't know, my ignorance. Then there's the things I don't know, which is my blind spots. And that's where the real breakthrough comes through. When someone says, yep, I'll do that, I'll be there. What do you look for to see if that's actually in their body and will be in their practice? And she came to me for coaching. She was really struggling because there's this challenge to our identity. And my first question was, what do you mean by vulnerable? And she said, weak, uncertain. I said, oh, I'm wondering if vulnerable is just open to other perspectives.
Welcome back to the Leadership Puzzle, the podcast that helps you solve the people challenges that matters most. And today's guest is Dan Winters. He is a generative leadership and team coach with Altus Growth Partners. Dan works with senior leaders facing the most complex challenges and helping them unlock new ways of thinking and transforming the way that they lead. What sets Dan apart is his ability to help teams generate new capacity, not just fix old problems. His clients span industries and continents, and they've tapped into his deep expertise in leadership development, strategy, and organizational culture to create high-performing, human-centered workplaces. And gosh, especially in times of its intense pressure or change, Dan is the guy that you want to talk to. So Dan, welcome to the Leadership Puzzle.
Pleasure to be here, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, Dan, we have talked a few times and we just have a great connection. So I'm really happy to dive into this idea of generative leadership. I would guess a lot of my listeners don't know what that is. So let's start first by what is generative leadership and how is that different from kind of traditional leadership and leadership coaching?
Sure. At its core, generative leadership is built on the principle that all results in an organization happen because of the conversations we have with ourselves and others. And those can be conversations that we're having right now, right? You and I scheduled time to have a podcast. We talked about what would make it a great episode. We coordinated our schedules and such. It also can be a conversation I had 30 years ago with my parents, with a teacher, with my first manager about what it means to be an employee, what it means to be responsible, what I expect from a leader. And it also can be a conversation I have with myself. What's my potential? What's my role? What risks am I willing to take? And how much faith do I have in myself to recover from failures and learning? And all of those come together to create the future that we want or the future we don't want. And as a generative coach, I help people recognize the conversations they're in and figure out how to have the conversations they need to go create the future that they want. And that may be individually, that's very often as part of a team, a network of teams, or an executive team that's really trying to shape the future for an entire company, maybe even an industry.
Okay, so you just brought the idea of creating new futures, and that part of what you do is to help leaders create these new futures. What does that really look like in a practical term? Because I'm sure it's not just like, oh, I'm going to create a new future now, right?
No, we really focus on what we call breakdowns, and breakdowns aren't inherently bad. They're just a gap between the future that I want and the future that I see coming.
Okay.
And so a potentially good breakdown could be my company just signed a great new contract. We've got potential for 30% growth. That's great, except that maybe I need to hire a second shift. Maybe I need to expand factory capacity. I create a whole bunch of challenges in that space. Whether I see that as good or bad is a function of me, the observer, and the circumstances that I'm in. It's not inherent to what happens. And so, for instance, I've got clients. One was a really capable director level woman who came out of a consulting background, was very, very driver, very much the conversation she had with herself was she had to have the answers. She had to be in charge. And part of that came from her father, who had been a senior leader in a very authoritarian organization outside the US. And so she had learned that real leadership is about certainty and drive
Mm.
and action. And she was struggling to grow because her role was now taking her into space of uncertainty. And her manager told her, you need to be more vulnerable.
Mm.
And she came to me for coaching. And, she was really struggling because there's this challenge to her identity, challenge to what's made her successful in the past. And my first question was, what do you mean by vulnerable? And she said, weak, uncertain. I said, oh, I'm wondering if vulnerable is just open to other perspectives, right? Your team has all these ideas, all this information. You still control what you do with it. You still control the final decisions, but it's more of a permeability for information and data, a willingness to ask questions and be open to the possibility your team sees something you don't. But that doesn't mean that you've given up authority. That doesn't mean you've given up even control over what the team does. And I just saw her shoulders drop and she got comfortable. And now we could talk about authentic leadership without giving up who she was. And
Yeah.
again, a sense of, what's the conversation you're having with yourself? What does that word mean? What's my history? And who am I as an observer when I'm in that conversation with my manager, when I'm in that conversation with my team? Am I being weak or am I actually being strong and capable and grounded and able to handle other perspectives? And as a coach, that's the space that I'm in. And I do that with executive teams that are struggling to be a real team. I do that with individuals who are just, they've hit a wall and they keep going back to the old playbook that isn't working.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine, I mean, so it sounds like the generative leadership coaching has a bit of, um, call it counseling. I mean, kind of modern day life coaching kind of an element because you talk about what's that soundtrack that you're playing in your mind, right? So I know just recently I had a thing happen that I was like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I mean, it's like I know better than to do that, and I replay that uh, you know that scenario, that conversation, and it can have a long term detriment if it's not dealt with.
Yeah. And one of the core models that we orient ourselves to and often our clients, it's what we call helps. You may see it in some of the literature as self, SELPH, but it is, what are the emotions and moods?
Mm.
Am I in a open mood or a closed mood? A closed mood, I don't like what happened and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm in resentment versus I don't like what happened and there's a lot that I can do about it. I'm actually in acceptance. And closed moods keep me stuck. Open moods move me forward. And I've been in those positions myself. We had a major reorg, and I literally sent a note to one of my partners in the business and said, I'm thinking about quitting. And he gave me the best one sentence coaching I've ever gotten in an email. He said, why don't you quit? And I went into 2 pages about what I could do with my job over the next year to make it what I wanted. It's like, ooh, I've got ownership, I've got action, as opposed to I'm feeling stuck because people did something to me. So that whole emotions mood piece, the language, we spend a lot of time in language because as I like to think, English is the most useful language and the least useful language. It has more words than any other language, but we immediately forget what those words meant when we brought them in. And so, I was working with a finance team about business partnership. And I said, when you go in and tell your business partner, the GM, you want to have a conversation. What's a conversation? And conversation comes from the Latin to move together. And it's literally, I just want to understand you. You're going to understand me. We don't actually have to converge. We're just going to wander and understand. That's different than a dialogue where we may understand each other and try to get to a common agreement. And it's certainly different than a debate where you bring your best argument, I bring my best argument, and whoever has the best argument wins. If I think we're having a conversation and you show up in a debate, then I can't trust you with anything that I have to say because you're going to try to use it against me.
Mm.
And so now instead of a partnership, we're in a fight. And we didn't even know we were in a fight because we didn't agree to the ground rules, right? And I've
Oh.
seen that with finance organizations all the time. We're brainstorming and they say, oh, why don't we try this? We don't have the budget for that. Well, what about this? Too much risk. It's like, I'm brainstorming. I'm not saying we're going to do it. I'm not at a point where I'm making a decision. When we get to a point where we're making a decision, there's a different process, a different conversation, maybe different people. Right now, I'm looking for possibilities. And I was talking to a marketing team that said, literally, when we're talking about new product ideas, we don't let our finance person in the building. And so you've got that language space where we spend a lot of time helping people really tease apart what's the language and what's the meaning behind that language for you, and is it agreed meaning for everyone? As you said, practices, right? I know leaders who show up with an attitude of our ideas get better when we challenge each other. And so they're always in this devil's advocate mode.
Hmm.
That's not bad with peers. It's also not bad if you tell everyone I'm in devil's advocate mode. But if you have a new employee who's fairly uncertain about their role in the company, their position, whether or not you think they're competent, and all you do is challenge them, they feel beaten up because they don't realize what game we're playing.
Yeah.
And you as a leader may deal with uncertainty and discomfort by playing devil's advocate as opposed to by being truly curious. And there are places where your practices are so ingrained that you don't even think about what are some of the new, more flexible moves you could approach. And then historical. What's the stories you've been living in? And then one of the places we spend some time that's a little unusual is somatics. What's your
Hmm.
body telling you? And it's like in our book we have a chapter how to recognize promise and commitment in the body. When someone says, "Yep, I'll do that. I'll be there." What do you look for to see if that's actually in their body and will be in their practice, or if it's just
Hmm.
words they're saying to get out of the room before they have to start a fight? So we use that lens with our clients, both individually coaching and also with leadership teams, to see what's the person that's showing up to the conversation
Yeah.
and how are they hearing it, how are they observing it, and what are they doing with it, and what could they do that would be even more effective for creating that future that they want.
Oh, you know, y- just this was so rich of information. I mean, I love the notion that a lot of the times where we're kind of button heads is because we're coming at it from different language, you know, conversation versus brainstorming versus decision making, right? They're all different kinds of
Yeah.
discussions and I've had those scenarios with finance, so I get that.
Even really small ones. I was talking to an HR leader who was trying to up level the partnership and sophistication of his new HR team. And I said, "No, give me some examples of what you want to see versus what you're seeing." He said, I want them to bring me their best recommendation and not just information. I said, I'm going to encourage you to take the word best out of that because as soon as you say best and you add 5% of additional adjustment to their recommendation, it means that their best wasn't good enough.
Hmm.
Or if they have a great recommendation, but there's a couple of things you could do different for implementation that you understand because you know the senior leadership and the culture of the organization better than them, now you've told them that their best isn't very good. And there may be three really great paths forward. And there's the reason that we would adopt one is not based on necessarily the quality of the analysis or even the quality of the solution, but circumstances or comfort level of the executives, right? I don't want to do this through training. I want to do it organically through staff meetings. Well, which of those is best? Whichever one you can make work. And they both can work. And so by using the term bring me your best, instead of bring me three recommendations that you think would be successful and tell me which one you'd recommend and why, now we can have a conversation to learn together.
Yeah.
And I can share without you being afraid of failing or getting a B, which is what we were all trained on through, 12, 15 years of school. So even the
But
term best, which is supposedly inspirational, can really damage the learning process for a team.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point. When I was first growing up in the organization, um, I would routinely bring three options. If I had to come, you know, go go find a solution to this, I would routinely bring two or three, ideally, solutions, and then give based on everything that I know, this is the option that I think is going to be the right one to pursue. But it I think that art of coming with a broad view of a scenario, thinking deeply about, what are the different ways you could tackle it, and then, putting your neck on the line says, well, this I think is the best way. That's a forgotten art.
Yeah. And the truth may be it's a combination of two of those options that turns out to be the strongest or the most reliable or the
Yeah,
one that we can get buy off for, right? The best would be everyone agrees that this is what we're going to do, but we know we've got some people that have oxes to grind, that
right.
people have a history and concern, that there's a lot of uncertainty, right? I don't know how the market's going to respond to my first move. So what's best is going to be something that is a little bit situational as we move forward, kind of the next best step
Yeah.
versus we put a plan in place and we've committed to that plan. And even when it turns out that the world shows up differently, we have to double down on the plan versus saying that was a great first step. What have we learned? And now what do we do next?
Yeah.
That learn and adjust move really gets in the way of the what's your best solution
Hmm.
in a dynamic environment.
Hey everyone, Jeff here. Just a quick break to tell you who is actually behind the leadership puzzle. Well, if you've been listening for a while, you know I'm all about finding the unique capability puzzle pieces that develop great leaders. Well, that's exactly what we do at Evolve HR Solutions, our sponsor, but on an organizational level. You see, we're all talent strategists who specialize in finding that perfect talent puzzle piece for your HR, operations, supply chain, and commercial leadership roles. So, what makes us different than the other agencies? Well, we dive deeper. We focus on the real cultural alignment and long term fit because the resume only tells part of the story. We do it all with a personalized, hands on approach that makes the process feel a lot more human. So, if you need to find that perfect leader to complete your leadership team puzzle, well, check us out at evolvehrs.com. That's evolvehrs.com. All right, let's get back to the episode. So, you've been doing this for a while, and have you seen that some of the things that might have been known, call it 15, maybe even 20 years ago, as kind of just standard, the way that people worked have been forgotten, and you're now having to train a new generation or leaders, retrain them on, hey, remember these concepts work.
Um, yes and no.
Okay.
I think some of this, um, the way we have taught these things in school, has often created blind spots.
Hmm. Okay.
I was coaching a person who's an accounting major who started doing business finance, sitting down with the GMs to really help support the business from a finance perspective. And her manager was resistant to this. And she had been very successful as an accountant and was really struggling with how hard this business finance was.
Right.
And I looked at her and said, well, the problem is when you went to college, you were taking accounting classes by people who thought the epitome of a career was to become an accounting professor.
Mhm.
These were not people who wanted to be business leaders with a finance lens.
Right.
And so she didn't take a lot of business classes. She took a lot of accounting, and now she's learning business. You've seen this with, engineers who go into management.
Yep.
It's like, you spent 20 years learning to be an engineer. There's no reason for you to learn how to deal with people as a manager in 6 months. This is a whole new learning.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of learning things that weren't taught in the first place. There's also a lot of moves to make things rational and predictable, right? We saw that whole world of almost Weberism. Like you can break jobs down into constituent parts. Um, people are arms and legs, occasionally with a brain, but we can quantify everything.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of the sum of the parts is, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah.
That's really hard for people to learn until they've experienced it.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time. There's a model I come back to over and over and over. There's the things you know, your expertise. That's why you got hired. And we almost always go back to our expertise to solve new problems. There's the things I don't know, my ignorance, and I tend to
Yeah.
hire people to fill that gap.
Sure.
And then there's the things I don't know, which is my blind spots. And that's where the real breakthrough comes through from. But we don't, you couldn't schedule a 4 hour staff meeting to think about the things you don't know, right? We're too busy for that. But that reflection, that exploration, that curiosity, and setting up some of that exploration is where the real insights come from. I was
Hmm.
in a chat, and a CEO was commenting that he's finding that his best strategists tend to make really bad GMs. And it's like, right, because they think of organizations as boxes, numbers, and then all of a sudden they become a GM and it's these people, and people are messy and complicated. I just saw an article in the Wall Street Journal, a Fortune 15 company that had a long reputation for being nice and is not performing well against their peers. So the CEO was saying, we need to be less nice. We need to have more uncomfortable conversations. Now, I'm pretty sure the real goal is not to be less nice or to be more uncomfortable. I think it's probably to be more direct, more
Hmm.
clear, have clear expectations,
Yeah.
clear, robust requests, and then discuss clearly when people are not meeting those expectations or delivering on their commitments. I don't need to be mean. I don't need to be
No.
brutally honest. But the fuzz in that language creates all sorts of noise in the organization and fails to get to the core of what the leader is aiming for, which is I want people to know where they stand. I want people to know what they need to do, and I want people to get the support to do it, or to move into a role or a company where they can be successful because they're not being successful here.
Well, that's interesting because he probably just gave a small group of people the license to be SOBs, and that single, hey, we need to be less nice, could radically change the culture very, very quickly.
Hmm. Yeah, and we've seen that over and
Yeah.
over and over.
Yeah.
And again, we go back in our work to making really clear and effective requests. Be less nice is not a clear and effective request.
Yeah.
And I don't. There's a lot of things I can do by being less nice. Tell me what you want. Give me
Yeah.
a standard. Tell me why it's important. The tone of being nice or less nice for the sake of what? I want clarity. Our company is not performing as well as our peers. We're coming in behind. We're not moving fast enough. Oh, you want us to move faster? Yes. Great. Then we probably need to understand the strategy of the company and where our work fits into that so that I can make autonomous decisions in alignment with the strategy. Don't just tell me to start making snap decisions bereft of understanding of the corporate strategy.
Yeah.
So now, what do you as my leader need to do to keep me and my team informed so that we can move faster and be intelligent?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It
It-
I describe it as peeling the onion without crying. There's a lot of layers, and very often what you get is this top level of the onion, and you need the organization to really understand and the leaders to understand the change that they're driving and what it takes to drive that.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's sometimes leaders don't think through. They see, oh, this action should do it, and it's not really, it really is. And I don't know. I think some of the most effective leaders that I've ever worked with are supremely nice, but they know how to have direct, um, empathetic and you know, good conversations when someone's not meeting the expectations.
Yeah, it was funny. I was doing a leadership program and I invited back graduates to share with the current group what they wished, what they learned and what they wish they had done differently to get more out of the program. And one of them came back and said, I knew within a month who the wrong people on my team were for the future we were trying to create, but I took a year before I moved people off and I
Hmm.
should have moved fast. And we took a break, and one of the participants in the group came up to me and said, Dan, I was one of the people she asked to get off her staff.
Wow.
And I said, how was it and how'd she do it? He said, it actually was really good. We spent the month really aligning on the vision, the future that we were trying to create. And then she sat down with me and said, given the future we're trying to create and what I've seen of your leadership, I don't think you are the leader I need to help us get there. And I agreed with her. I could see how I was leading and what the gap was. And then she helped me find a role in another organization where I can work on my leadership. And I can see how in 3 years I could go back and do the job the way it needs to be done. And that guy ended up thriving in the new organization, went to another company as head of for that function.
Love it.
That he felt a little hurt, but really cared for and in agreement because she did this with him, not to him.
Yeah. Well, you bring up this great concept of teams, and I'm certainly cognizant of the time we've just been chatting away, which has been great. But your book, Growing Groups into Teams, and so you highlight a couple of key promises that convert groups into teams. Can you share what those are, and maybe how leaders can, actively reinforce, that team concept?
Yeah, we think about teams as a group of people that take responsibility to create a certain kind of future that's a shared promise. And they commit to coordinate well to produce that future. And there's a couple of words in there that I want to highlight. I use the word responsibility, and we think about responsibility versus accountability. What we see very often is someone who is part of a group. Maybe it's a project, and Jeff, you're going to be the project manager. I'm responsible for this piece of the project. And every 2 weeks, the project team gets together and we update our Gantt chart to see if we've actually achieved our goals for that 2 weeks. And in that meeting, 80% of the people are checking email, checking text messages until they hear their piece of the project or they hear their
Hmm.
name,
Yeah.
and then they look up and they put it on the project manager to hold the promise of the project, and they only take responsibility for their piece.
Right.
And that's really an accountability. For us, responsibility is I take responsibility for the success of the overall promise. And so if I see the project manager struggling, I look for opportunities to step in. If I see another team member struggling, I look for opportunities to step in. That may be pointing out to this person that they're struggling or they're failing. That may be pointing out that their team doesn't have the depth that they're counting on. And I know that because the way they're interacting with my team is missing something important. And maybe I need to loan some of my resources. So
Right.
I was working, and we see this often even more at the senior level, where you have a relatively new executive team or an executive team that just hasn't practiced being a team.
Right.
They're good at running their function, but they're not thinking and operating at the corporate level. And it ends up being the CEO who has to hold the promise of the company, and they're often playing referee. So it comes to budget time, and everyone's looking to get their budget approved versus really thinking about, oh, my move here is to hold my budget flat or drop it a little bit so that we can reinvest those resources in a place that can have bigger impact. Or I'm going to hold off my investment this year so we can invest in the critical foundational pieces. And people will come in with their wish list and then leave it up to finance and the CEO to make hard decisions. That's not a team, that's a group.
Yeah.
I saw one where engineering and sales were struggling, and the issue is they had a salesperson that the company had had for quite a while who didn't have the sales moves for what the company was trying to do. And engineering would constantly complain about the salesperson not getting into the right level of detail with customers for them to really be successful. And not once did engineering say, why don't I lend you one of my engineers to coach this person to go on client meetings to help them prep, to give them a checklist of don't come back until you have answers to these questions,
Yeah.
right? Engineering just complained. And
Yeah.
it's like that is not being a team.
Right.
That is me not taking responsibility. I'm just taking accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. I've facilitated a number of things when I was in the corporate world. Are you a work group or are you a team? And you
Yeah.
can be a work group, and if that's the function of this body of individuals, that's okay, as long as you understand that you're not going to achieve what a team can achieve if that's how you really are going to think about it.
And I got to go back to the stories that I'm living in,
Hmm.
right? You know, I'm worried it's not my role to tell my peer that I think
Oh,
they could
yeah.
be leading differently. I don't want to start a fight, right? It's already uncomfortable enough. I'd rather just keep the brittleness in silence than actually break through the ice and drown.
Yeah.
That all this is going to do is lead to more disagreement. Or you've got some people who this is going to create some very, or it's going to bring up some very uncomfortable emotions because you're unfamiliar with how to work with those emotions. And so I do everything in my power to keep the moods and emotions tamped down.
Yeah.
And sometimes our move is to come in and help them recognize and navigate those emotions, to be able to recognize those as a signal, or as something that is their natural response but isn't their effective response. And so, can you put into language what's behind that mood or emotion? Sounds like you're afraid of something. What are you afraid of? I hear how angry you are. What are you angry about? What's at risk? And people just aren't practiced in
Yeah.
that space. One of my favorite phrases from one of my partners: "A complaint is a poorly worded request." And so when someone starts venting and complaining, okay, you care about something and you're seeing that you're not getting it or it's at risk of not getting it. Tell me what you really care about. And let me listen to the care, the concern, the request behind the complaint. Test that and see if there's something we can do about it.
Love
And
it.
then you get into this space of, well, that's not really fair. If he's going to yell, why do I have to be quiet and thoughtful? It's like, because you understand and see, and he doesn't,
Yeah.
right? Whoever sees has the responsibility in the relationship to help move it forward. And is that fair? You're stronger, more experienced, more mature. Yeah, it's fair that more of that weight goes on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that fairness move gets in our way a lot of times in really being an effective team when there's some misalignment.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair is a four-letter word sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. And we
Oh,
we prefer to call it care,
yeah.
right? Is it fair? No, but you care, and you can actually see breakdowns and how to navigate them.
Hmm.
Um, and you get to step in and help navigate the breakdowns, not contribute to them. Um,
Interesting. Boy, I wish I had a much better understanding of who I was, what my moods were, what I was feeling, why I was feeling them, and even asking some of these questions that on the surface seem really simple, but are quite deep and profound when you're feeling this turmoil or you're feeling this anger or you're feeling something, anxiety, you name it, and how many just push it down and just move forward.
yeah, and move forward with whatever their default move was in the past,
Yeah, yeah,
as opposed to what's another move that could open this up to more learning, different opportunities, right? I will describe myself sometimes as a coach and consultant. Those are really different skills, right?
yeah.
Coaching
Oh,
is
yeah.
often about self discovery and reflection. For me, I have this line, which is, um, I don't need you to self-discover how to do strategy. I've taught classes. There's lots of books out there. If I can help you orient to strategy by 10 minutes of consulting instead of 3 days of coaching, let me offer that to you, and then we'll figure out what that means to you and how you put it into practice.
Right.
But I have to be very conscious of the choice that I'm making between coaching and consulting, and I need to engage my client and say, I'm going to share with you some of the things I know. Is that okay? And then it's still a question of how you internalize that versus karaoke leadership of whatever I just told you.
Yeah.
That this has to be you in the way you do it. And there's going to be some discomfort. There's going to be practice. There's going to be learning. There's going to be failure. That's what learning looks like. Um, and probably you need to forgive yourself and you probably need to forgive your team a little bit in that process.
Sure.
And that's well beyond the here's the model of strategy. It's like
Right.
here's the human engagement in the model of strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you bring up a good point. There's a big difference between consulting, coaching, and frankly, even kind of the new discipline of executive coaching, which is what you're really talking about. I mean, I grew up on the model of management coaching where I will listen to your problem and I will help you. Uh, I'll give you an answer to your problem and then watch how you do it, very much like maybe a sports coach would do, versus what you do where you're asking questions and you're getting them to think differently and deeply. So it's even the language of coaching has changed over the last decade or so.
Yeah, and part of my role, and one of the advantages of having been around doing a bunch of stuff for many years is I've been in lots of conversations and seen lots of things. And there's
Yeah,
other coaches who just haven't had those experiences, just like there's a
sure.
bunch of experiences I haven't had. But I've had clients who are senior controllers, vice presidents, senior vice presidents going for a CFO job. And when I ask them, so, what's the role of a CFO? They describe a really smart controller. And it's like, you have a blindness. I've coached and worked with many CFOs. I've worked with many members of C-suite. I actually know the role of the C-suite within the organization, and particularly for the CFO with the board of directors. There's this entire space you just don't understand. So let me fill in some of those gaps for what that looks like, where that would play. And now, how would you bring your style and your personality to that and your skills? And then to the extent that that style isn't going to serve you, can we have your style show up more flexibly with some different moves into that space to create the future that you want to create, which is you as a CFO of an incredibly successful company.
Yeah, yeah,
And that process is a little different than let me give you the checklist of leadership. Let me, work on this aspect of being in the C-suite.
right.
I try to bring a more holistic picture so that they can play a more full game.
Yeah. No, that's great. And and on that, unfortunately we have run out of time. We've just been chatting away, which has been great. But I want to give you a chance. So your book, Growing Groups into Teams, I imagine it's available on Amazon and everywhere that books can be bought.
It is. It was a number one bestseller when we released it, and it's been great to see how teams and leaders have been using it. Um, and for us, we tried to bring some different topics and some different perspectives on topics than we were seeing in other books. So, a couple of my favorite chapters. One of them is on, as I said, recognizing promise in the body. And, how do you really get a somatic orientation to whether people are going to follow through on commitments and what you may need to do as the customer, as the requester, to help them follow through.
Love it.
We have a chapter in there I love, which is, do you even have a team? And
Mhm.
it was one of our consultants who was living in Africa, and they asked her to take the lead on electrifying her village. And she said, running the wires isn't hard. Having people who will maintain that and keep it running for 30 years after I'm gone, that's a different question. And she spent a year looking at the local village, looking at the district, looking at the federal government, looking at all the players to figure out if they had a team that could actually create a future of electricity versus running wires to this village. And then we have another chapter I really like, um, creating a team at the top, which is a place that we play a lot, where we discover that people are really good at leading their function, but they're not really good at being a leadership team for a company or an organization.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and each
No.
chapter standalone, it has tips and tricks and questions you can ask yourself or you could ask your teams to help accelerate that growth.
No, that's great. Yeah. So, growing groups as a team, into a team on Amazon. And so if folks want to get in touch with you, it's directly on LinkedIn or altusgrowth.com, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today on the Leadership Puzzle. I think there's still a whole lot more we could dive into. So maybe you'll come back later and we can hit some more topics.
I am always glad to come back and would even be glad to bring one of my other partners. You'll have a bit of a different perspective on some of the same topics.
Oh, that'd be amazing. So we'll plan on doing that. So, well, everyone, that's it for today's episode of the Leadership Puzzle. Dan really gave us some things to think about, generative leadership and how to build teams and how to thrive. So, if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to share it with a colleague and leave a review. And if you're ready to learn more about leadership, go ahead and go to altusgrowth.com or you can go to evolvehrs.com. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep putting the pieces together. We'll see you soon on the Leadership Puzzle.